Domestic violence is a crisis that affects millions, but one of the most dangerous moments for a victim is when they decide to leave. While leaving is often the right choice, it's also the time when they are at the greatest risk. That's why having a safety plan, a well thought out strategy tailored to their specific situation, is crucial. Today, we're speaking again with Brian Bennett, a retired South Carolina state law enforcement officer and expert in domestic violence training, to discuss practical strategies for victim survivors. With years of experience responding to domestic abuse cases, Brian has seen firsthand what works, what doesn't, and what victims and their loved ones need to know to navigate the complex and often dangerous path to safety. Our goal is to come up with best practices for victims to help guide them on this difficult journey. I'm Callie Lyons with FITSNews. Thank you, Brian, for joining me again today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you.
It's often said this is the most dangerous time for a victim, when they decide to leave. Can you explain why that is?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons. And before we get too deep into things, let's just say, or let me say that, a lot of the information we're going to talk about today is generalized. Some of it can be specific, but it's never going to be as specific as an individual person's circumstance. Every domestic control situation has its own unique factors that will likely not be fully addressed in this discussion. But what we're doing is we're providing some best practices and some ideas as a general basis, foundation for everyone to build on. So to answer your question, why is it the most dangerous time for victims when they decide to leave? Well, two main issues exist, and that's an issue of control and exposure. Abusers have a need to control just about everything in these particularly intimate partner or domestic violence type of relationships. And when an abused person decides to leave, that sense of control from the abuser, that sense of control is being lost. And this is often when maximum pressure and threats are used to regain that control. Often our abusers hide their behavior using a public persona that doesn't always match with their private actions. And so they realize that if an abused person leaves, the abuser will likely be exposed as someone contradictory to what the majority believe. And this is how many abusers keep their power. It's secrecy and seclusion help them maintain their power so that they're never exposed. And again, so once they're exposed, their influence over the abused person and others starts to diminish, and they don't want that. That lack of control is really one of the major causes for them to exert more pressure and more threats, and that obviously translates directly to the abused person deciding to leave. Those pressures are maximized even more so at that time than perhaps earlier times in the relationship.
Well, what are some of the key warning signs that a victim needs to leave immediately?
Well, one that you and I have talked about previously on other discussions is this act of strangulation. Anytime there's an act of strangulation that takes place, that is like one of the first and number one predictors of a future homicide. So if any of that has occurred, whether there's loss of consciousness or not, whether there's any direct external recognition of injury, that's a number one, like you got to get out. Because what the patterns have told us and what research has told us about these acts of strangulation is that these abusers have now gone to the point in their psyche that they can justify putting someone's life at risk. And so that's number one. Any type of talk by an abuser that they want to kill themselves or that they can't live without the abused person. One thing that I always tell everyone is that if someone is suicidal, they are potentially homicidal. And we don't want to pass this off as an insincere statement by the abuser. Commonly people try to explain it away. Well, they were just talking out of emotion. They don't really mean it. The fact of the matter is when someone uses that language, I should just kill myself or I can't live without you, they have had to think about the act before they can formulate the language to speak. So there's been some type of scenario, there's been some type of event that they've played in their head about how to take themselves out of life's equation, or to use that as a pressure tactic, as a guilt tactic to keep the abused person there. And they want to put that guilt on the abused person. Like if something were to happen to me, it's because of what you did or because of the decision you made. But the reality is the core issue is that them discussing any type of suicidal tendencies has put them on a path of actually doing it, but in combination creating a homicidal event out of it. That's where we get these domestic homicide suicides. So we don't want to take that type of language lightly. That is another dangerous indicator that something bad is going to happen. Also, along those same lines is terminology like, if I can't have you, no one will. That's again showing that possessive control. And again, in order to formulate those type of phrases, they've had to play a scenario in their head to justify why that would be the case, or why they would be justified in harming someone to keep them from leaving, or having someone having the abused person be with someone else. Any type of threats to harm children, to harm law enforcement, or to harm anyone else who may try to intervene. Again, it's one thing to perhaps threaten the person that you're with, but when you extend that threatening attitude or those threatening behaviors to people outside that little small nucleus, to people who would be doing nothing more than be innocent bystanders or people who would intervene to help, that demonstrates again another level of the abuser's psyche to not stay within the norms of the law, but just norms of reasonable social behavior. And we also have to consider what type of nonverbal communication or acts take place. Not everything is done with words. Right. Many times the targeted abuse victim survivor will know tendencies or behaviors of the abuser that are not known to anyone else. It could be a hand gesture. It could be emotion. It could be a look. And the targeted abused person is the only person that really knows specifically what those nonverbal behaviors mean. It's a coded language, so to speak. And so I would say to people that are in these situations, what do those behaviors mean to you? What level of danger do you associate with that nonverbal behavior, communication, or acts? And based on that personal knowledge could also come an awareness that things are getting ready to get real bad very quickly.
That's very interesting. And there's a few things there that you said that would not have occurred to me. I have always thought that a threat of suicide in an instance like that was simply manipulation. So it's very interesting that it's like, no, they've gone there. They've gone
Correct.
there in their head. So take it seriously.
Absolutely. And many people, and I have to be critical to many different professions, law enforcement, judiciary, or prosecutors, friends or family, we tend to minimize that. Oh, well, they didn't really mean it. They didn't really mean it. Again, in their mind, they've already gone there in order for that terminology or phrasing to come out. Something had to go on in their brain. There had to be some type of discussion in order to articulate that. So we have to take it very, very seriously.
Okay. Now, in cases where immediate departure is not possible, what are the most important safety considerations for planning your exit?
So immediate departure, like you said, by the question you asked, isn't always possible. If it's not immediately available and possible, we have to think about at least two things: protective barriers and self-protection. Now, I can't give legal advice because I'm not an attorney, but what I can do is offer my opinion. And one of those things is protective barriers. Doing something to place a physical barrier between the abused and the abuser. Now, that could be a locked door, door that has a lock on it.
Yeah.
If a door doesn't have a lock on it, using items to barricade the doors. People often see in movies where someone takes a chair and they wedge it under the knob of the door in a way that if the door is being pressed from the other side, it forces the chair deeper into the floor. Moving furniture, things such as that. Even just in instances where you may not have a closed barrier, or you're able to move furniture, just putting something between you and the abuser, even if it's non-movable, rather than kind of standing in maybe the open middle part of a den, where there's nothing there, stepping behind a counter or behind a shelf or something like that, or even around a corner, can slow someone's progress in getting to you, which might give you enough time to use other means or abilities to escape if needed. We also have to consider weapons of opportunity. I mean, if I were to just say weapons, a lot of people might say, well, a firearm or a knife or something like that. The reality is that within a person's immediate area of control, there could be all kind of weapons of opportunity: pens, pencils, a comb, keys, really anything, a brick, a frying pan. And again, these are weapons of opportunity as a means of defense. Okay, I need to, preface that very, very head, as a means of defense.
Gotcha. Okay.
You go on the offense, you become the aggressor. These are
Right.
things that would be used in a defensive cause or a defensive measure if you need it. But also consider using something that can't be easily taken from you or wrenched out of your hand. Things that are really, really long are easy to grab. You also wouldn't want to use anything that wraps around your wrist that essentially, even if you were to let go and needed to let go, that you would still be trapped and, pulled towards someone. And again, this is unique to the environment. This is unique to what is immediately around. But thinking ahead is what puts us in a better proactive state than a reactive state. So I always tell people, even for our law enforcement officers, when we go into an environment, we always need to be looking around for things that are potential weapons, whether they're offensive or defensive. Look around, see what's available and what could potentially be used against you or for yourself. And with that being said, we also have to have an acknowledgement of, particular rooms to stay out of. We really don't promote anyone being in the kitchen area just because of the availability of sharp-edged weapons. I would also say stay away from perhaps bathrooms as well, because there's some things in there. So, bathrooms, kitchens, other rooms that might be less dangerous, might be a bedroom, might be a common area of the house like the den. But again, remember, there's going to be objects in all of these rooms. We're just trying to mitigate and reduce the amount of things that can be used against us versus, limiting or mitigating that as much as possible.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Now, when I was a teenager, and this was a long, long, long time ago, they had just kind of started self-defense classes for us. And one of the things that they taught, that actually I still do, is to carry my keys in a way that they are protruding from between my fingers. So, not a weapon. It's something I probably have on me all the time, but might come in handy if I needed to get away. So that's the kind of thing you're looking for here.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, that would be very hard to pull out of your hand versus, if you had a long stick per se, or someone had a lot of leverage and authority to grab the other end of that stick. And so those keys, as you might see, and I've seen in some self-defense classes, where the keys are held in a way that the protrusions come between the fingers, is a distraction to some degree. Could be punching and scratching, and we also have to, be kind of common sense about this too. Throwing things at people. We see this in movies all the time where somebody perceives a threat and they're trying to get some space and distance. And so they're throwing items, because those items, although they may not cause a lot of injury or maybe cause no injury at all, it's a distraction to a potential attacker or abuser that they have to navigate their vision or their body position to get around or avoid. So, we want to think about those things as well.
Okay.
And as you mentioned, self-defense classes. There are many groups out there who offer specific self-defense classes for women, but just defense classes in general for, children and other adults. And I think a lot of those techniques are usable. And I tell people, we all have what I call a bat belt, if you will. The more that you have at your disposal, both in knowledge and in tangible access, the more that you can draw upon when the time comes to defend yourself or another person.
All right. Now, drawing on your expertise and what you've seen work for survivors, let's talk about best practices for creating a safety plan. What are the most important considerations for leaving safely and minimizing risk?
Well, one of those things I believe is really important is secrecy, and that can be very, very difficult. But doing everything we can to limit the abuser from knowing what's going on is one of the key foundations here. But this can be very hard because if money and finances are being tracked, if the home is being monitored with a alarm system, and as often we find out with cameras, that can be hard. Cell phones and can be monitored. There can be internet monitoring. So this has become increasingly hard as technology has advanced. In days before, internet and all this, these fancy apps and stuff like that could be, loaded onto your phone either overtly or covertly. It was easier. But now, I mean, you talk to a lot of people who have, home alarm monitoring systems, and anyone with that app and that phone can monitor the house at any time, and listen to microphones and watch cameras and things such as that. And then when you have online monitoring of your bank accounts to see, you can go in there and set up, when is money taken out, when is it deposited. I mean, you can be notified the moment a penny is spent. This becomes just increasingly hard. But again, secrecy is really, really important. And risk surely increases the more an abuser knows. And secrecy, if we can manage it, generally allows an abused person more time and for intentional planning. And intentional planning is absolutely necessary to prepare for a safe exit. We have to proactively think ahead. If we think in the moment, we're missing a lot. It's kind of like, again, going back to what we tell law enforcement officers, the more information you know, and the more you kind of play out scenarios in your head before an incident take place, the more quickly your mind and body will react to the possible options and solutions that you've already thought about. It happens more quickly and with more accuracy. So thinking about possibilities, thinking about challenges have to be considered. And there also has to be a conscious awareness of having a contingency. When someone thinks about what they should do, they also need to think about, what am I going to do if that happens to fail? There's a terminology that we use in kind of the law enforcement field, and it's 2 is none, 3 is 1. What does that mean? 2 is none means you should have a backup for a backup. If you don't, and that one option is not available to you, then you have nothing. If you have a second option, that also may be taken away at some point. So 3 options are better than 1 option, if that makes sense. So 2 is none, 3 is 1. So I always tell people, if you have time and you can manage and you can be proactive and intentional, think about all the things that you want to do and how to do it, but then also think of the contingencies both in the second and third level in case those aren't available.
Wow, I'm going to remember that. That's really great advice for so many situations, actually. So, now, what about a go bag? Is that an important aspect of the plan? If so, what should be in it, and how do you secure it until it's time to go?
Yeah. So go bags are something that's been talked about for decades. We didn't necessarily use that terminology until a few years ago, where it became more of the vernacular and more of the kind of common social term for being prepared and being proactive and being prepared in any type of emergency. We got that a lot from environmental emergencies and that sort of thing. Is kind of where that came from.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be anything formal. I mean, certainly people can go out and purchase, some pretty fancy, backpacking or school bags with lots of pockets and everything. But the simplest, easiest, most inconspicuous go bag is a black garbage bag. That's what I've promoted for years because it doesn't stand out as being a go bag. It a lot of times can be passed off as just a sack of garbage laying in the corner of a room or the back of a closet. Even if it's outside the house, along the edge of the woods or along the edge of the yard or the edge of the road or behind a business, a lot of times it would just be passed off as, well, that's garbage. But when people prepare, just a black garbage bag, I would say double layered just to make sure to keep water and stuff out of that. And things that need to be in there are obviously clothes. Now, if a person is trying to escape their domestic situation and the abuser sees them taking clothes out of the house or packing clothes away, then that may, tip off the abuser that something's getting ready to happen, or there's some preparing. But one way to help manage that is perhaps getting clothes from friends. I know a lot of times targets of abuse don't want to disclose all the details of what's going on, but with trusted individuals, they might say, hey, if you're out and about, could you maybe go buy, a pair of sweatpants and a sweatshirt, something for both warm weather and cold weather. These things don't have to be super expensive. They just have to be functional. We've had individuals who didn't have a lot of money, and so they went by, thrift stores, whether it's a church operated thrift store or something run by the Salvation Army or Goodwill or something like that. And again, it's just a matter of needing clothes for functionality, not necessarily their looks. Again, cold and hot weather. So putting a selection of clothes in there, which would include undergarments and that sort of thing, socks. We forget a lot about those type of things, but I mean, they're necessities. Toiletry items, of course. Soap, toothbrush, toothpaste. Those are generally pretty cheap to get. Any type of hygiene items, particularly for young ladies and women that they need. That can also is something that's absolutely needed as well. And real critical is important documents. And people say, well, what kind of documents would I include? Well, what about your driver's license? Now, you could certainly carry a copy of your driver's license, but if your driver's license is something that maybe is in a different place, what can you do? I mean, if a person has the availability, go get a duplicate driver's license made. You can go to the DMV and, hey, I need a new driver's license. I lost it. I misplaced it. If you have the ability to, make a color copy of it, that would be helpful. Any type of birth certificate, especially if you have children. Birth certificates or copies of birth certificates, they don't always have to be like notarized or official, but something that kind of establishes in some base way the legitimacy of someone's children, just in the interim, if necessary, because we know that, finding some notary public or having the time to go down to, your records down at DHEC may not be available, but having those insurance cards, health insurance, car insurance, whatever other kind of insurance you have. And this is what I'm getting ready to say here is particularly true for a lot of people, but any type of immigration, citizenship documents or passports. We know that there's lots of people in South Carolina who are not from this country, who may be here illegally or legally. And these documents are very important. And a lot of times, sometimes these documents have been hidden away on purpose to limit a targeted abused person from leaving. Like, well, I don't have my citizenship papers. I can't prove my immigration status. I don't have my passports. If there's the availability to have copies of those or the originals, have those as well. Any protection order or restraining order is really, really important, because these documents in many cases is what's going to give law enforcement the authority to make an on-scene arrest if these orders are violated. And I want people to know that these protection orders, these orders of protection and restraining orders are supposed to be in an electronic database that law enforcement has access to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But some people may not be aware of this. These databases sometimes go down, and it's not because the databases fail. It's because these databases have to have a time during the week where the records are updated. And sometimes these systems, when they are updating, law enforcement can't queue or query those systems and get an immediate return. So that's why it's important to have these documents so that a law enforcement officer can examine them at that moment. And in reference to all these documents, again, a copy or a hard copy is great, but also don't neglect an electronic copy. Well, what does that mean? If you have any way to take pictures of these documents on your cell phone or to have them scanned, keep them on your cell phone or email them to an email account that only you know about. Your phone might get smashed,
Right.
or your phone may not be available, but the servers at Google and Yahoo and all that, they're not going down and they're not wiping away all this data. So if you have an account that you've made that's only for you and only you can access, and you've electronically scanned these documents in, they're going to be there pretty much anytime you need them. When I was on patrol, there were a number of times that, I would tell people, well, do you have these documents? And they would say, well, yes, I do. Well, do you have a copy of them? Well, no, I forgot, or I don't have them available. And I would ask, is there any other way that I could find a copy? And, if we can log into an email on a cell phone or a computer or something like that in a safer place, we can pull those things up. It's something for us to utilize and perhaps take some enforcement action based on that. Another thing is what I call a burner phone while we're talking about cell phones.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a burner phone is simply just a phone that is used in an emergency. Now, some of your domestic violence shelters in South Carolina have a collection and a box of donated cell phones. Many of those will have airtime cards along with that. I tell people out there, if you ever really want to help a domestic violence shelter, aside from your funds and toiletry supplies and things such as that, give them phones. Give them modern phones, not the flip phones.
Right.
Give them modern phones. And here's the other thing too. If an abused person has the funds available, you can go to a store and buy a phone at Dollar General, Family Dollar, a lot of even gas stations. And although you may not have the money to put calling time on that phone, that smartphone, if it can get a signal on a cell phone network, still has to have the availability to call 911. So you still have a line for an emergency. The burner phone also allows you to have some control over some individualized accounts, and you have the ability to limit access to some of the stuff that you saved. It's also like your little file cabinet where you can keep pictures and things like that you need. And again, this is, even without having cell phone service. I mean, think about the Wi-Fi capability of your smartphones.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, your free Wi-Fi network. A lot of people may not be aware of this, but Google and other online search engines will allow you to go in and get a telephone number for yourself. For example, I have not just my cell phone telephone number, but I have a Google telephone number. Now, I got that because when I travel out of the country and I don't have cell phone service, but I have Wi-Fi, I can still make phone calls anywhere in the world for free using a free Wi-Fi network.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of power that comes with having one of these. And, I just did some checking the other day, and a burner phone or a phone that you would use for this purpose, you can get at Dollar General and Family Dollar and other places for as little as $29. And it's fully functional. Keeping cash. Again, this can be hard if finances are being tracked, but if any type of cash, loose change can be secured, hide that away as well. Put that into the go bag. Any type of debit cards drawn on a secret account. If again an abused person has the availability, open a checking account or a savings account at a bank that is not tied to a joint account that you already have. So for example, if you if the person and their abuser has an account at Wells Fargo, don't open an account at Wells Fargo. Go to, another bank like Bank of America or Chase or, one of these places, and get an individual account sight and sound separated basically from the abuser. Because, the need for funds is really important. And gift cards. That's another thing that friends and family could do. If they know that there's a need, is just simply buy cash cards that they could be put into these go bags. So there's a lot of stuff that we covered there. And it sounds like a lot, but legitimately all this stuff can be kept in a little small bag, wrapped really, really tight. And I've advised a lot of people over the years to cache or put away some of these bags in very strategic places. Maybe put them in the woods behind the house, or ask a neighbor that you trust if there's, a place that you can put this, like behind their shed or in their shed. Or we've had other people that have put some of these bags at their place of work, someplace in a bottom drawer somewhere. So there's all kinds of places that we can hide these go bags. And again, just a simple black garbage bag is one of the best things to hide it, but also keep everything in there really protected.
Such great advice. And in part because each one of those things keeps somebody from having power over you, involving each one of those things. Like if we think about Micah Frances Miller and her phone being stolen, she was at risk trying to retrieve that phone. She was basically putting herself back in harm's way, trying to negotiate with him over, the retrieval of this, whereas there are just other ways to handle it. So don't make it easy, right? That's kind of what it comes down to.
Exactly. Don't make it easy for the abuser. Absolutely. Try to do everything with a specificity and intention for your individual control beyond anyone else.
Yeah. I've had a girlfriend recently tell me, yeah, he moved out, but they always leave things behind so they can come back and get them. And I thought,
that's always the hook. There's something that I need. They try to legitimize recontact because of an item, and the more separation that you create and limiting those hooks, as I call them, the better off.
Definitely. So this is all about when you leaving nothing that can be used as a hook to get you back.
Correct.
Okay. That's such good advice. Now, who can you trust with the details? Who can a victim trust with the details of their safety plan? I would assume you'd want to keep the circle small, and you were saying secrecy is so important. I hear oftentimes these victims, they get to the point where they don't know who they can trust. Sometimes they don't know who they are anymore. How can they identify who they can trust?
Well, to part of your question there, yeah, they need to keep a very, very small circle. South Carolina, to people from other states, South Carolina seems like a small state. For people in South Carolina, we may consider ourselves pretty large. But the reality is South Carolina is small. And one thing I've learned a long time ago is there's only a few degrees of separation between any two people. Yeah. In South Carolina, it seems like if you talk to somebody long enough, they know somebody and they know somebody and it doesn't take long for people to connect the dots. And so keep that circle very, very small. The less people know, the better, because of the potential for accidental disclosure or the accidental sharing of information that can get back to the abuser. And whether by accident or intentional act, limiting information is very important. And it really, it's hard for me to tell people, what are the, core components of who to trust. I mean, it comes down to, that individual, who they've developed relationships with, who has demonstrated the ability to limit what they say. But I also think a targeted abuse victim needs to be very intentional about what they want released. I think there needs to be a very direct statement saying, I'm going to tell you some things, but do not tell anyone else. Keep this to yourself. And I think that direction is really, really good, but it also kind of lets the abused person know if information did get out and the limited number of people you told, that means there's a leak in the dam somewhere. and you need to reevaluate. And I hate to have to bring this up, but some abused people don't even trust their law enforcement, and this is why. Maybe law enforcement, has responded poorly to their domestic situation in the past, and then I know that that's an unfortunate reality to some people, is that the superior service that they should have expected, the compassion, the understanding, the patience that should have been offered wasn't offered. And so they don't trust law enforcement's ability to keep information secure. They sometimes don't trust law enforcement's decisions to enforce the law. So even trusting law enforcement can be a bit of a barrier, particularly if the abuser happens to be a law enforcement officer.
Right.
If the abuser happens to be a law enforcement officer, and we've seen this happen many, many times in South Carolina. I mean, law enforcement officers are no different than any other profession as far as, being potential abusers. But with that comes this realization that if a law enforcement officer is the abuser, what other law enforcement officer is going to believe me over my abuser, who already has a connection through the profession, but also could have a legitimate connection through business, the business law enforcement relationship.
Right.
Even with the dispatch centers, we've seen this happen before where, unfortunately, the dispatchers who got the call knew the house, knew the address, knew the people involved, and information got, disclosed that wouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
So again, keeping that circle very, very small. I would also say, let your social media accounts go dark.
Oh, yes.
Don't be putting a bunch of stuff on your social media. If anything, you can suspend them, temporarily delete them. I wouldn't even promote creating a new social media account, because again, that's the potential for the public and to know information. And again, with these degrees of separation, people that you may not know but know you can inadvertently pass something on. So let that social media presence go dark. Limit any type of public post or comments. I would also say limit text messaging. And the reason for that is because in text messaging, there can be screenshots, data can be saved. If you're going to talk to somebody about the situation, the danger you're in, the fear that you're in most cases, again, we're talking about this very small circle of people in the safety planning. Talk to them one-on-one, or talk to them actually on the phone in an audible way, not text messaging. Because again, the reality of capturing these conversations and then forwarding those messages to other people and then other people and other people, it just can exponentially spread to places that it should not have gone.
Such a good point. And we even see moles used to get information. Somebody will basically be talked into getting close to you by the abuser to get information to relay. And that's not always apparent when somebody's trying to be your friend, or when somebody's giving the appearance of trying to be your friend, right?
Absolutely. And many abusers are master manipulators. So if you have this abuser and the abused person, and we have this third party in the middle, sometimes the third party in the middle doesn't know that they're being manipulated as well. What's being told by the abuser is it seems with good intentions, and this third party is seemingly asking in their own mind. They don't see anything nefarious or wrong about it because they haven't been given the whole picture.
Right.
And it's not unusual for third parties to be manipulated as well, like you said. And how would a targeted abuse victim pick up on that if the third party doesn't know themselves they're being manipulated? It can be very, very hard. So keep that circle very, very limited.
Good point. Now, research suggests it takes an average of 7 attempts before a victim successfully leaves for good. And those are a hard 7 to make it through, not just for the person who's being abused, but all the friends and the family members who anguish with them over every attempt. Why is the cycle so difficult to break?
Well, there's quite a few that I could point to. I think the reasons that it's so hard to break is probably as diverse as the amount of people that are on the planet. So we could go on for days, but I'll kind of cover some of the main ones. One is an emotional connection. And people say, what are you talking about? Well, most relationships start off on very good terms. And emotional connections are very, very hard to break. That's usually like the last thing that has to be severed for someone to make a decision to walk away, because a lot of other things can be taken away, but that hope and belief that the abuser will change, or that hope and belief that the abuser will revert back to that nice, compassionate, caring person at the beginning of the relationship, is what causes a lot of people to hold on. I mean, let's face it. If you went out on a date with someone and on the first date they punched you in the face, I doubt very seriously any of us would go out with them again. But that's not how these abusive relationships start. They didn't start that way, because if they did, they would end very, very quickly. So there is a legitimate emotional connection that is very, very hard for targeted abuse victims to break. So that's one. The lack of available resources is another. Things such as financing, housing, transportation are legitimate concerns. And when your whole life is being controlled and you don't have a car to use, or the car that you're using is being tracked, if your finances are being tracked, if you've been isolated away from your friends and family who might offer you some resources, are in no way available to you, that causes a lot of people to question, is what I face out there by myself worse than what I'm dealing with now? And for many, the unknowns of what they are going to face when they step out on their own is a greater fear than staying in the relationship where they know what's going to happen. And that sounds kind of weird, but for some people, they want to know what's coming. They want to know what is going to happen and could happen versus the unknown.
Yeah.
And that sometimes is the basis of, well, I know I need these resources. I don't have these resources available when I'm outside. So I'd rather have a meal. I'd rather have a house over my head. I'd rather have transportation. I'd rather have the ability to take my kids to school. I'd like my kids to be fed. And so the victims who are targets of abuse will stay in that known situation versus the unknown. They can also question their own judgment due to criticisms or gaslighting. Again, these abusers, being master manipulators, they may utilize criticism. Well, you don't speak the language, for people that are non-English speaking. Well, you don't speak the language well enough for anybody to believe you, or for you to tap into resources that are available. People can't understand you, or you're not smart enough to be on your own. I'm the one that has to control everything because you can't and haven't been able to do it yourself. And then just the gaslighting, and for people that aren't familiar with that term, it came from an old movie where it was an abuse-related movie where the guy, in that case, the male abuser, was doing things intentionally to make the young lady in that movie think that she was crazy, which caused her to question her own sanity. Yeah. And when you question your own sanity and your own decision making, then you give up that control to the other person who could be your abuser. And so questioning their own judgment can be part of that, not leaving earlier. And again, going back to their own abilities. But I would say the number one reason that they don't leave is fear. Fear of the unknown, or fear of the safety of themselves or their children. And fear causes everybody to do lots of different things. And this is a scenario that I want people to think about. And it came from a show that I watched many, many years ago about prisoners of war. And I don't know if it was on the History Channel or the Learning Channel, but it was something on cable TV 20 plus years ago. And this documentary interviewed prisoners of war from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And these prisoners of war were like people that were pilots, people that were in the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, who had been captured in times of war. And particular to like special forces people and air crews, they go through something that's called SEER training. Essentially it's an escape and evasion school. They teach, the military teaches other military personnel how to escape from their captors, but also if you're caught, how to manage being a POW. So, I mean, millions of dollars are spent on teaching these soldiers how to adapt and overcome these prisoners of war situations. And there was an interview that was done with these prisoners of war, and they asked them this question. They said, when you were a prisoner of war, did you ever think about, were there times that you could escape or you thought about escaping? And almost without fail, they responded in one of two ways. The first response was, I saw opportunities to escape, but I was scared of what would happen to me if I got caught. The other question was, or the other response was, I saw opportunities to escape and I knew that I could get away, but I was scared of what would happen to my buddies that were left behind. So if these prisoners of war who had millions of dollars of training to adapt and overcome a POW situation didn't leave out of fear of what would happen to them or another person they left behind, why do we as society think a domestic violence victim or any targeted abuse victim would have a better opportunity or a better psyche to leave?
Mm-hmm.
Fear is the main underwriting factor on why our targeted abuse victims don't leave. And there's many others, but that is one of the main ones right there. Fear. Fear of safety, fear of the unknown.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of goes into my next question. Recently, I heard on a podcast this advice that I had never heard before, which was sometimes the safest decision at any given, at a specific given moment for that victim is to stay home or go back home. In other words, it's not time to leave. The safest thing they can do in that moment is stay put. Do you agree with that? And what factors does a victim need to consider if they are in that situation?
Yeah, this is one of the hardest questions for me to answer, because as a person and as a law enforcement officer, both individually and together, I want to say I do not promote returning home.
Right.
But this is incredibly difficult because it's situational and based on specific factors of each relationship that I can't always account for.
Right.
Certainly with some things that I mentioned earlier about, the strangulation and the threats to harm themselves or another person or to harm friends or family. I think those are immediate red flags. You've got to get out of there. But again, I know there's a lot of other situations that aren't so easy to navigate. So I would have to say it really is situational. I would advise people, if you don't have to return home, don't, but also know that's a decision that they have to make up in their own mind. And it's just an incredibly difficult question to answer. But as far as what they should consider in those type of situations, I would say safety is number one. What is the likelihood of actual injury or death? Is it highly likely? If it's highly likely, then I probably wouldn't go back.
Right.
And if that doesn't exist, if there's not an immediate or actual threat of injury or death, is the leaving or is what you subject to purely emotional or economic? And what I mean by that is that we know that emotional control and economic control, again, are a form of control, but that may not necessarily translate to physical danger at a moment. So if it's a thing where there's some emotional abuse or economic abuse, it might be a matter of necessity to stay. Again, knowing that you need housing, you need food on the table, you need some time to connect to resources to leave at a later point. So that might be a consideration. Actual danger and injury versus purely economic or emotional, which you might be able to, take some time and proactively manage leaving at a time that is more opportune, if that makes sense.
Sure, sure. So a delay is not failure, in other words. A
No.
delay is just a delay. You still have a plan, you still have your go bag ready. Just because it didn't happen in that moment doesn't mean it's not going to happen. You're still working towards that every day.
Yeah.
Is
I
that
mean,
fair?
go back to that POW example. I mean, there were, these POWs were repatriated because, they were freed by other soldiers, but there were those that did escape. But
Mm,
often in those times, they had to strategically plan when was the best time. Again, if there's that immediate threat, they might have had to bolt right then, but many of those had to kind of bide their time. Like, well, I can manage the difficulties that I have right now if it opens up a better window at a later point to give me a higher rate of success. And again, I think everybody has to kind of manage that or think about that within the specific details of their individual situation.
good point. Of course, loved ones who are going through this alongside the victim survivor, they often feel frustrated or exhausted, or maybe their resources are tapped out after a few tries. They may even lose faith when a victim returns to an abusive situation. So, what are some ways friends and family members can provide support, or how would you encourage them, even if they don't understand the victim's decision?
Well, this is one thing that abusers count on. Abusers count on friends and family becoming frustrated and cutting
Mhm.
off availability. That is why if a tactic of isolation doesn't work, the tactic of creating uncomfortable familial situations gets the family to move away on their own. So we have one situation where the abuser has control and actually pulls the targeted abused person away from their family and friends. But if that's not available, the abuser will create so much chaos that the friends and family get frustrated and they go, I'm done. I can't deal with this anymore. And you have a bad picker. You have picked the wrong person to be with, and I just can't deal with this anymore. So understand, to friends and family, that is exactly what the abuser is counting on, and that is exactly what the abuser has been trying to make happen to maintain control. So with friends and family, the recognition that that is a tactic is key here. Recognize that the abuser is going to use methods to try to get you frustrated as friends and family. Beyond that is the issue of consistency. Let me just say that someone who's the target of abuse hears the words of the officers and friends and family that are saying, this is not safe, this is not right, you deserve better. Almost without fail, every abused person that I've talked to said that they heard those words from friends or family, but when the friends or family got frustrated, they didn't hear that anymore.
Oh,
We friends or family and even law enforcement gets frustrated sometimes because we know that many of these people have the ability and they have the strength, and we can offer them the resources to do it. But let me be clear when I say this: when an abused person has to know within their own mind they can do it before they will actually do it. You can have
mm,
all the encouragement in the world, all the resources offered, but until that abused person knows within themselves that they can do it and it can happen, generally that first step will not be taken. But here's where consistency is the key. The same message needs to be provided over and over and over again. You know, the abused person doesn't just need to hear it once. They need to hear those same words of encouragement, those same words of empowerment, those same services offered with consistency every time. We need to stay away from being critical. Okay. Being critical is not beneficial in any way. Showing frustration is not beneficial in any way. As a matter of fact, it actually diminishes someone's self-worth when they see someone get frustrated, when the abused person sees that people are getting frustrated with them. and they start to internalize a lot of times, well, people think I'm just dumb or ignorant, and that diminishes the empowerment and the self-worth and the self-strength that they need. The reality is that it's not abused people that go out looking for abusers. That is not the reality. The reality is that abusive people go out looking for targets. So when people say, oh, well, that person just has a bad picker, or they just keep getting with the wrong person over and over and over again, that's not putting the blame in the right place, because abusers are predatory. They go out and find people that they have the opportunity or could manipulate. So we have to know, as friends and family, to put the blame in the right place, not on the abused, but the abuser. And maintaining that, again, that constant message of support and assistance. And when the time comes that your support is asked for, be reliable to offer it. Don't make promises that you can't keep. Don't make resources available that you can't offer. Because again, when that seventh, fifth, sixth, or seventh time presents itself and they say, I need some help, you can't then go, well, I don't have anything I can offer you, because now your words didn't have any meaning and they had no power. And they're looking for help. And this is anybody that has a connection or an interaction with an abused person. We need consistency and reliability. That's really important for friends and family to know.
That's a game changer right there.
Absolutely.
Just understanding the motivation and how you're playing into their hand,
Mm-hmm.
That's huge. Huge. Well, is there ever a time when it's best for a third party to avoid involvement with a victim who chooses, for whatever reason, to return over and over again?
The only time it might be right would be when there's a direct threat of injury or death to the friend or family member that's offering their assistance. And I say might, because there have been a lot of people hurt. Let's just be clear about it. There have been a lot of people with good intentions who've been hurt trying to intervene on behalf of an abuse victim or someone who's targeted for abuse. I think especially me being a parent, I mean, I have a very young son, but most parents, when they want to defend their children, they would tell you, they'll say, I'd take a bullet for my kid. And they mean it.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that I would put myself in physical harm's way, even to the point of death, to protect my son.
Right.
If he was under that threat. But at the same time, we have to understand would that make the situation worse or better? The last thing we want to do is make it worse.
Right.
And unfortunately, we've seen in South Carolina and nationally where we've had multiple fatalities out of an abuse situation. So I would say, the only time it might be good to not get involved is when you know that there's a direct threat to yourself or others in that situation. And this is a decision that each person needs to think about. People that help have gotten hurt. Again, we don't want to make the situation worse. And this is where law enforcement personnel really should be expected to step up, because law enforcement personnel are more equipped to manage the risk than the general public. I mean, it's not that law enforcement officers aren't at risk, but we're in a position to face that risk with better equipment, better decisions, and much better outcomes. We've got, bullet resistant body armor. We've got handcuffs. We've got, tasers. We've got batons. We've got firearms if we need them. We have defensive tactics and control skills that can mitigate the risk to a much better degree than the general public. So when those times of immediate injury or death present themselves, it's really, really important to engage with the law enforcement personnel and agencies to respond to those situations and put some ownership on them, because that is what we are called to do as law enforcement officers. We are called to intervene. That's the nature of our job. And so I don't want people to go, well, law enforcement's got better things to do, or they're not going to take me seriously. Again, I have to, be honest. And I know that some law enforcement officers and agencies have not responded well, but it's definitely better to initiate or ask for their support and assistance than to never have asked at all. Even in situations where a law enforcement officer may not have enough to arrest somebody, but just having the authority and the presence to remove somebody from a situation. Sometimes the accountability comes later, whether there's with an arrest or an arrest warrant.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the first greatest need is to just remove someone out of the dangerous situation, and law enforcement officers are more equipped and better equipped to do that.
Wow. Great advice. And as usual, I've learned so much from talking to you. I really appreciate that. Is there anything we haven't covered that you would like to talk about?
I don't think so. I mean, we've pretty much covered it again as a good foundation of basics. Again,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to remind everyone that every situation is specific to itself. There's a lot more dynamics than we probably would be able to cover here. But again, I just want to encourage anyone that's watching this who is a target of abuse. You have the power. You are good enough. You are strong enough. You are smart enough to manage this. To friends and family out there, be consistent, be reliable. Understand that it's the abuser who's exerting control. It's not by any fault of the abused person in their decisions. They're being manipulated. And to our law enforcement officers and our judiciary and our prosecutors, let's be consistent and reliable to step in when people need help, apply the law where it can be legitimately applied, hold offenders accountable, and then let's get our abused people connected to the appropriate resources to give them a better opportunity, a better day to improve the state of their life for the future.
It's great. That's great advice all the way around. Well, thank you so much. And, to those who are tuning in to participate in this conversation, if there's something you would like to ask Brian, I might be able to twist his arm and get him to sit down with me one more time, or maybe a couple more. But I think this is a really good series that we've got going, a really good discussion that we've started. So, if there's anybody out there who has a question for Brian, you can email me, Callie@FITSNews.com. Leaving an abusive relationship is never simple. And as we've discussed today, it's often the most dangerous step a victim can take. But with the right safety plan, support system, and awareness of potential risks, survivors can take control of their journey towards safety and independence. Brian, thank you for sharing your expertise and experience with us. Your insights serve as a critical reminder that while every situation is different, no one should have to navigate this journey alone.
Thank
For
you.
anyone listening who is in an abusive situation or knows someone who is, please remember help is available. Reach out to local shelters, domestic violence hotlines, law enforcement, or trusted individuals who can support you. You're not alone, and there is a path forward, one step at a time. We'll continue this important conversation in future discussions. In the meantime, if you or someone you know needs immediate assistance, please don't hesitate to seek help. Thank you for joining us today. Stay safe, stay informed, and take care. For FITS News, I'm Callie Lyons.